um, of our Milan Kundera book club will be discussing the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which we are very excited about, and it looks like we'll have a very intimate discussion today, so you get to all participate. And I wanted to thank Dan and Robert again for doing this journey with us and sharing their knowledge and helping us dive into Milan Kundera work. And I was just thinking that they really picked the 3 best works. And Robert, you think that this is the best, don't you?
I think it's the most, I think it's the quintessential. I don't know if it's the best, but I think it's in a way the most typical. Yeah. I think maybe the joke is my personal favorite.
I like the joke too. I have to say it is very difficult. It's like you have to read. But anyway, we wanted to thank you both for doing this for us. And we just thought that, you're both very literary people and you need to keep reading.
Oh, yeah.
So we have given you this. It's a wonderful
fantastic.
There's a present.
Biography.
I was like wondering why you were carrying this book.
I thought you were promoting this for the next book club.
So we wanted to thank you.
Thank you so much. That's
and
great.
There's always a little gift certificate to a
wow.
restaurant that you all need to know about. It's called
That's so sweet.
Cuba, and it's on the 19th Street in the
thank you.
Heights. And they have kind of European food, but it's a Slovak couple. And so hopefully
That's so
you
kind.
can get a little fix of Czech food.
Wow.
It's they call it European, but they have Czech dishes.
Eurotex,
But they have Czech.
run it, and so they have Slovak seed.
But they have Czech dishes. So you all need to try
This
it.
is great. I'm going to start calling myself Eurotex.
Okay,
What's your
perfect.
identity? Eurotex.
So
There you
after-
go.
after
It's
you
fantastic.
eat there,
Thank
you'll-
you.
Thank you so much. That's really sweet.
So, are we all right on sound?
And can I do one more?
Sure, please, please.
Because people, that camera took such a liking to us, but they probably want us to take a liking to them as well. Their opening concert this year is actually Janáček. It's all Czech music, and it's on the 26th of September, and they are offering all the people on the Czech mailing list here 20% discount on the tickets.
Wow.
So it's September 26th, 7:30. And
It's got Janáček?
I think you have it on your, yes.
Okay.
And so look, there we go. So look at the card. If you're interested, we'll.
Great. Well, we're kind of now able to kind of use some of the resources that we've developed over these meetings, and inspired by the musical dimension that the DeCamera young performers introduced for us when I think we were doing the joke, the second meeting. I was listening today to, again, it's another Milan Kundera novel with a soundtrack, and he makes quite a big deal late in the novel about Beethoven's Opus 111, which is the piano sonata number 32 in C minor, and it's the second movement, which is the variations movement. And it's about 16 minutes long, and it's perfect for a commute home or somewhere else. And I think this is the third time I've read the novel, but the first time I've actually gone to Spotify. Maybe, I certainly know the first time I read the novel, we didn't have Spotify back in the day. But it was really quite illuminating to listen to it, because it's a very sprightly piece of music in some ways. Parts of it remind me of like ragtime, actually. It's really quite an extraordinarily dynamic piece of music. So that's my recommendation for either the journey home. So it's piano sonata number 32 in C minor, or just Opus 111 by Beethoven. And it's the second movement is the variations, the one that his father loved, and really used as an inspiration for the novel. Well, I mean, there are two musical modes you could think about in terms of reflecting on your reading. I mean, he does say, makes quite a big deal of it, as the novel begins to talk about itself in part 6, that this book is a novel in the form of variations. And who am I to deny that? So I'm endorsing that, but it also strikes me that this novel is again one of Kundera's adventures in polyphony, right? Because his father, the musicologist and the great musician himself, was such a huge influence on him, and because both the father and the son were, in a very positive way in the shadow of the great Janáček, I think he can't but help think in musical terms. In one of his nonfiction works, he talks about the craft of writing a novel as composition, right? So he's always thinking in musical terms. And I go back to that meeting where we had as a guest, Kaya Lil, was that right? Our PhD? Kaya Lil. Kaya did a great presentation on how much polyphony meant to Kundera, and I brought from the notes that Kaya gave us just a couple of quotes to remind us of how polyphony might be operating in this novel, the many voices. So this is Kundera himself describing the kind of polyphony that he finds in Janáček's music. The voices intermingle, interlace, and mesh in a fascinating polyrhythm, so that from time to time, we have the impression of hearing wild cries from the crowd, each person shouting his truth without listening to the other. This is neither homophony or counterpoint. It is the inimitable polyphony of expressions. And I think a way in which that's useful is, I think, that polyphony of many different people shouting their truth. It's the very opposite to that magic circle that he describes, the magical circle of ideological agreement, the magical circle that he found so enticing when he was young, and even though he was thrown out of the magic circle and it closed behind him, he really missed being part of that kind of singular mind of total angelic agreement. And the other quote from Kundera, which I think is relevant to maybe what's going on in this novel, he also defines polyphony as the simultaneous and wild confrontation of several musical units, each of which has a separate meaning, separate emotional contents within a dramatic space. There is interruption rather than transition between themes. Melodies do not complete one another, they oppose one another. All this creates an extreme tension that makes Janáček identifiable from the first measure. And I think in the same way, love it or hate it or be somewhere in between, from the first page, it opens in such an unorthodox way with this little parable from actual history with the man who vanishes and the hat that remains. Did you notice, by the way, at the very end with the funeral, the hat made another cameo appearance? It goes tumbling into the grave. I'd forgotten that. I thought that was a really nice touch. So this is a very unusual way of opening a novel. It's drawn from reality. It's drawn from history. It's not starting with an imaginary story and imaginary beings. I thought another way in which it might be useful to start off the discussion is to create a kind of a grand question, which is, to what extent do you think the novel is still relevant, that it still has a kind of artistic charge, a moral vision or an amoral vision? You know, to what extent is it still a viable work of art? Because it's definitely a very different time and place from the time and place in which it was created. The very specific circumstances surrounded the composition of this novel. So this is the first novel that Milan Kundera wrote in exile, right? And so it's his first song of exile, and maybe there's an exile's bitterness in it. Maybe there's an exile's sweetness in it. He talks about his sweet, singular, lost land of Bohemia. He got out of communist Czechoslovakia in 1975, drove straight to France, didn't look back. And this is the book that he wrote between 76 and 78. It was published first in France in 1979. It was a sensation because of the censorship. It wasn't published in Czech until later, and it was published in Canada in Czech. And in the meantime, in between time, huge hit when it was published in French in 1979 by Gallimard, and then The Talk of New York when it was published in the fall of 1980 in the English translation. So this is the beginning of Milan Kundera as a kind of truly international sensation and bestseller. And the other way in which I'd kind of locate it in time and space is that not only, you know, is 1968 not too far away for him, certainly in time, though he's now 2,000 kilometers away from Prague, as he says. This is very much, I think, in terms of literary fiction, this is very much a book of its time in which he's tapping into and he's deeply inspired by the biggest movement that was happening in global literature at the time, and that's magical realism and the Latin American boom. And I'm going to finish my remarks by just quoting my favorite passage from the novel, which I think it's very difficult to imagine this without magical realism. This is the Prague version, the magic Prague version of magical realism. And the girl, I'm on page 94, 95, if you want to follow along. And the girl started laughing and stamping her feet harder so that she rose a few centimeters above the pavement, pulling the others up after her. And a moment later, not one of them was touching the ground. They were all taking 2 steps in place and 1 step forward without touching the ground. Yes, they were soaring over Wenceslas Square. Their dancing ring resembled a great wreath flying off, and I ran on the ground below and looked up to see them as they soared farther and farther away, raising the left leg to one side, then the right to the other. And there below them was Prague, with its cafes full of poets and its prisons full of betrayers of the people. And from the crematorium, where they were incinerating a socialist deputy and a surrealist writer, the smoke ascended to the heavens like a good omen, and I heard Eluard's metallic voice, quote, "Love is at work, it is tireless." And I ran after that voice through the streets so as not to lose sight of the splendid wreath of bodies gliding over the city. And I realized with anguish in my heart that they were flying like birds and I was falling like a stone, that they had wings and I would never have any. No matter what we think of writing like that these days, that caused a sensation among British and American critics when it was finally published in English in 1980. That was the cutting edge of literature. And of course, great excitement that this was a voice from Eastern Europe, from the other side of the Iron Curtain. Dan?
Well, you asked a question. Maybe we can just get a couple
Yeah,
opinions
yeah.
on that, and then I'll follow up. Is it still relevant? Do we care? Tell us why.
And, okay, and I could be, but this circle
I have fidgety
that's
energy, I'm sorry.
floating into
Mhm.
the sky, it represents that joy of belonging.
Yes, yes.
There's just that, and just the happiness of that, and of course he contrasts his situation where he's not part of it. But what's so interesting to me, in his books, he also talks about the kitsch. And I think this joy of belonging that's floating.
It's just
above
kitsch.
the rest,
Absolutely, yeah,
kitsch.
yeah.
And so because it's phony.
Yeah.
And there was another part of the book was with those two American girls who were in the summer program.
For the UNESCO.
And then Sarah, the Jewish kid, goes and kicks them in the butt.
Yeah.
It's like, this is all nonsense.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's very relevant. I do think that, I do think people have an urge to belong. But I wonder that the things that we want to end up being belonging to, they are all just kind of fabricated. Or, all these movements or trends maybe going back to that polyphony that life is so multifaceted that that's just life and that's the reality. So every time there is some kind of a movement or communism or something, and it just brainwashes people and gives them this false security in a way.
Yeah, they have to maintain a kind of artificial innocence, don't they? Because there's no room for dissension. And I mean, that also the way that they fly above the streets of Prague, this is part of his angelic imagery. And I think it was really good it's so useful to recall his kind of vision of kitsch, which we talked about when we had our meeting about the unbearable lightness of being. His definition of kitsch is rather eccentric. It's not what you find in the dictionary, but basically said kitsch is an inability to recognize the crummy side of life. And in that circle, there's no time to acknowledge the crummy side of life, right? There has to be a kind of ideological purity. I mean, it's a kind of Puritanism, in this case, a political Puritanism that he's talking about.
Right,
So-
but I mean, it's relevant now because it's also what we're living. We live in a time of kitsch still, right? And so the ideological purity of our own kitsch is part of the issue that we're trying to get at, right? I mean, I think that's what you're pointing to.
I think people do yearn for the simplicity of some kind of ideal, and it's not a reality. But people can want it.
Yeah, it's so what they yearn for, particularly the young generation and the revolutionaries of 1948 and their poet, Eluard, kind of the bard of the revolution. It seems that they're very forward-facing. They think that in the future, everything's going to be utopian. Maybe these days, I don't know, we're looking back to something in the past as utopian. Maybe we're facing back as opposed to facing forward. Maybe, the environmental situation is so difficult, it's hard to construct even in one's imagination a future utopia. Here's something else that I want to kind of hello, welcome.
From the top.
Well, here's something else that I noted as kind of connected with this. I wanted to ask you if you thought this has kind of faded away as a feature in our culture, or maybe it's intensified. But personally, I thought that one of the most interesting ideas that is potentially still enduring is the idea of not just forgetting, but organized forgetting. Or is it true that people will be unable to survive crossing the desert of organized forgetting? Do you think that's intensified over the last 45 years since he published this novel, or does that not really translate into the culture of the 2020s as much?
Well, I think it translates perfectly because one example that's very painful for me is another country that did lots of organized forgetting is Russia, Soviet Union. And I'm afraid that what's happening now to that country is the result of this organized forgetting.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know the history, if you don't remember, you lose touch with the reality. Because, there are no causes and consequences. This chain is broken. And people just become absolutely, like floating.
I think that's a great image, the idea of the broken chain. It reminds me of an experience my parents-in-law had when they were touring China a few years ago, and they went on a tour of Tiananmen Square, and the young woman who was their official tour guide, they asked her, what she knew of the events of 1989 in Tiananmen Square, and she'd never heard of it, or at least she claimed never to have heard of it. So talk about a broken chain.
So-
Well, are we doing that now, dumbing our society down and not teaching them history and the kids and everything? They don't know anything about too much about our past. It's my opinion.
Yeah.
I think they've been dumbing down our country too much, so they can control the masses eventually.
I think at the beginning of the book, he talks about the news cycle and how one tragedy is just forgotten because there's another tragedy happening. And I feel like that's definitely very relevant today. The news cycle is getting faster and faster.
Absolutely. I did think that some things in the novel have dated, to be sure, but that really did seem to be prophetic, that he has a sense of events speeding up, and he's talking about, the major news events of the 1970s. And I thought, just you wait, Milan. CNN hasn't launched yet in 1979, but the news cycle has put that into overdrive, hasn't it? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to think, and I know just from other discussions, people are very fond of this character. Then you've got Mama, who seems to have come from a much slower time in terms of news. The World War I was an entire epoch, and she's not too sure of her own chronology. But you've got this, I think, memorable image of the Russian invasion in August 1968. And for her, the tanks are minuscule, and the pears are what really matter. What tanks? The big crisis is my pears. The dentist never came to collect the pears. And as he says, tanks are ephemeral, but pears are eternal. That kind of sense of, for an older generation, Mama presumably being born around 1900, her sense of scale is so different. But by the 2020s, have we all been completely flattened out, so we're all kind of addicted to the news cycle? I don't know.
So, go ahead.
I would like to ask what people, how people felt when they read this book. Do you feel does this book do anything to you when you read it? Do you have any sensations?
Are you depressed? Are you happy? That kind of.
Yeah, I grew up in Slovakia. I came to Canada in 1990, so I went through all of this. Not all from World War, but from 59 till 90. So I totally associate with everything what is written in this book. I sort of know the system very well. Every time I read Milan Kundera, I return back. I feel like I was brought back like this system, like squeezing me, and that's why I want to know how other people feel when they read his book, because I feel extremely depressed. I feel like deprived of something when I read his stories, because he's just unhappy. Of course he's unhappy. We all were very unhappy living under communist system, and we were not allowed to do practically anything. Smart people were not able to say anything, they were not able to travel. We were just good when we were good kids in school, quiet and learning and listening what people say. Since I was 3 years old, I never listened. I was always fighting. All teacher and priest and everybody hated me because I had an opinion. I could not take it. I could not take it.
You were never part of the circle, right?
You were exactly.
Yeah.
I was wild. I just could not stand to be under control. So I really feel what he writes. So do you feel anything?
Yeah, I'd say it gives me, it's like a very ominous feeling, but almost like understandably so, thinking about the times.
Yeah.
So each of his books have given me that kind of ominous, but it's like taking a peek back into history and going, I don't feel that in life, and it's almost like, okay, it takes you to a time that does seem to have a lot of ominous things around it. So yeah, I
feel, reading from especially from a woman's perspective, a sadness, a fearfulness. Like Tamina, she was an incest victim, and she just learned that you have to do what people want to do to you, and or that was her world. And I like Mama. I like Mama. And she reminded me of my Bobby Scott who came to the U.S. after World War I. And so yeah, pears. They were farmers, and so I get that, kind of thing. But yeah, I was not so much shocked, but saddened too about the story at the beginning of the girl who, under a pseudonym, had somebody else write an article about astrology, which here is nothing. Lost her job, couldn't get another job because somebody wrote an article about astrology, and you can't even think about anything other than what you're told. Which I'm like you, there's other countries that I know, I've got an opinion, and I would have my head cut off or something, in some other places. But yeah, that was surprising, not so surprising, but a sadness that I read this and the characters.
Yeah, but I found this very difficult to read on a couple levels, like all the books. Like my reading of all of them is that he's struggling with sexuality questions, and he tries, unsuccessfully, but he tries really hard to identify with the women. And he moves towards women at the end of the stories, and he's trying to tell the stories from the places of the women. At the end, Tamina is clearly, and he tells it over and over, she is the point of the story. But somehow he can't quite tell that story convincingly. There's something about it that's a little bit weird. I think you're very right. He's talking about Innocent Arrendero, which is a story by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. She floats off into all of this kind of very celebratory, there are butterflies everywhere. It's this moment of magical realism as celebration. And he finds it utterly unconvincing. He looks at all this history stuff, and if we just remember our history, then it'll be okay. And he says, no. The most important thing that had happened in all of Europe in the last 150 years was the Black Crows.
Yeah.
Right? And the Black Crows moving into the cities, that was by far the most important thing. And he's clear with that. He's got a whole different sense for what it means for us to be part of this. He's got, it's very dense with illusions. I don't know how you felt about it, but it was just like, oh my God, there's another one, right? So there's a bunch about Thomas Mann.
Yeah.
And Thomas Mann, he talks explicitly about the
short story.
Short story with the death of Venice, but he also talks about Zarathustra, and the Opus 111 is central to Thomas Mann's, I think, greatest book, which is titled after Nietzsche's idea, and the idea there is that Schoenberg plays Faust, the devil, he's like tempted by some kind of celebratory music, decides against it. And he goes deep, deep, high modernist. And I think a lot of ways that people will read Kundera is to say that he's not postmodern, he's not magical realism, he's high modern in a very aware, kind of pushing back way. And so the angels, I think that it's a clear reference to Rilke, right? Every angel is terrifying, right? All the messages I get, you've got all of the repetition that Rilke has in his poetry. High modernist, depressing, right? It's all about death. It's all about this kind of movement. Zarathustra. Has anyone read Nietzsche? He may not be relevant to anyone anymore. So Nietzsche's got a very famous story called Also sprach Zarathustra. It's the whole myth is about Zarathustra. The whole arc of it is that he, at 30, same age as Christ starts preaching. Zarathustra goes up a mountainside and goes by himself to live for a while, then he goes back down. At 30, Tamina goes to Western Europe. Right? There's a parallels that kind of are very obvious as you're reading through it. The end of the parable in Zarathustra is he goes through these famous stages. You start out by being a camel. You have to bear the weight of tradition. So you have to go through, you have to do your reading, you have to go to school, you have to do all these things. Then you become a lion. And the lion says no. The lion just pushes back and says all of these things. I'm not going to follow you anymore. I'm going to be like the 3-year-old who thinks on her own, right? And then the final version of the story in the end of Zarathustra, the 4th book, is he listens to his children. Right? He's listening to the voices of children who are calling him into a new kind of heaven. And he's playing on this idea that somehow releasing the no longer fighting against that no, gives you this space to walk off and follow the children. Now Tamina does the same thing. And if you've read the book, it ain't so nice. Right?
It's terrifying.
And that's I think trying to work out this kind of male-female thing. So if you know the 60s kind of counterculture stuff, this story from Zarathustra shows up in Marcuse and all of the other people that are celebrating the sexual revolution and all the people that are, let's do more orgies. And he's clearly gone to a lot of orgies.
Yeah.
But it's weird.
What's this stuff?
It's just, you're just like, okay, this is just weird. And he doesn't seem to get it at all. You're just like,
Probably hasn't gone.
maybe he hasn't, it's just like he's heard about one somehow. And he tries to tell a story, he tries to put himself in the place of these people, but he doesn't tell the stories very well. And I think part of that is the Opus 111 is about variation.
Yeah.
But variation in a weird way. And what Thomas Mann does, and claims that Schoenberg is doing, is thinking about variation in this kind of jazz-like moment, but within very clear structures. And so the repetition isn't pleasant to listen to exactly, but it's emptying, right? And so if you can think of Schoenberg and kind of hear what goes on, the way in which the counterpoint and the polyphony works, it creates spaces between the sounds. And modernism tries to do this, tries to create spaces where instead of having a kitsch moment, where you go like, oh, I get it. Oh, this is the point. This is what I understand. You go, oh, here I am transcending, right? I'm looking at a piece of Rothko, right? I'm in a Rothko chapel that didn't leak. And so I'm looking at the Rothko paintings. It's not that I go like, oh, I see a devil back there. That would be to miss it. You're living in this kind of variation of color, and the variations of color give you a space of consciousness, which is more like the crows, more like that border on the other side. You're no longer trying to get laid all the time. You're trying to think about what it means to be in conversation with others, and thinking about your death differently. You're still, like Nietzsche, no longer saying no longer going, oh, I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to write everything. I need to be an author, because authors cheat death somehow. You're not saying that. You're saying, in this kind of repetition, in this variation, a space is created where I can transcend without rising up. I'm not floating up like the circles in that kind of
it's
kitsch
an
way.
interior space, isn't it? Because he
It's an
says that the
the infinity of the
variation
interior.
brings you into the infinity inside you. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's all I was going to try and argue, is that somehow that very dense kind of moment, it's not, I don't think it's about postmodernism and about this kind of magical realism. I think it's about finding within modernism the resources of that creation of space.
Yeah. Do you think that because it is that journey into the interior, that goes right back to St. Augustine. That's a long
Who loves
tradition.
pears?
There we go. That's our official fruit of the evening. Do you think that's why maybe there is such a note of resignation towards the end of this novel?
Well, it's glossonite.
He, through his novels, he always comes to a point where he uses the word absurd. And so his character always gets to that point. And it's a little bit of, I mean, I don't know, I get what you're talking about, but then he went on about this word, lithos, which means like this self-pity and empathy.
Did it sound right in Czech? Was it right?
Yeah,
about it?
and it's, at the end, it kind of says, you know, only young person can experience that feeling, because only person that just has not lived and been knocked around by life. And he kind of almost leads to the point where, you know, finally, when you kind of mature more, you can laugh at yourself, and you also realize that no one is perfect, or everybody has faults. So there is, throughout all of his writing, sometimes it just leads to how life is just absurd. And even like in the joke, you know, the main character finally just kind of said, you know, my life has been terrible, I have been kicked out, I have been in jail. But then at the end, I mean, I guess Tamina dies, or you embrace life and realize that
Well,
it
but the
is
absurdity of the-
absurd and that you are not perfect.
But the
or
absurdity of the
everything.
rhinoceros, right? So the play of the rhinoceros that's getting played
Right.
out. Is that absurd in the same way, or is that a different type of absurdity?
I don't know that play, so I cannot comment on that.
Everybody becomes a rhinoceros on their way to communism.
Yeah.
It's an anti-communist kind
I think it's certainly absurd when you talk about the joke. Absurd in the sense that your life can turn on a postcard.
Yeah.
There's such a randomness, you
And
know.
that can happen even
Yeah.
today.
He
Like
could have
in-
put that in an envelope or not. And I think maybe there's a line that I wrote into my copy of this novel, From the Unbearable Lightness of Being, which maybe, and he says something very similar in this. It's like he's kind of rehearsing the unbearable lightness of being at times. But he says, the characters in my novels are my own unrealized possibilities. And maybe there's an awareness of just how incredibly close he came to living some of those unrealized possibilities, you know?
Right, but do you okay, sorry.
Yeah, decision to go into one cafe as opposed to another might have changed everything. And there's no sense of destiny and fate, and he's living in a very messy, contingent world. I did want to ask you about the Litos, Alice, and other Czech speakers, because I did wonder to myself how this is actually rendered in the original Czech. And
Well,
this is the
yeah.
this is the third last novel that he writes in Czech, but he's still committed to the Czech language at this time. Litos is an untranslatable Czech word. I mean, did he approach that differently
No,
in Czech?
he still demonstrated what it means. He
Yeah.
still uses the examples of the poor swimmer student. You know, he still or the bad violence to it. He still,
I feel sorry.
and he still used number of words to describe the word. But then in the end, he kind of zoned in to,
You cannot really translate.
So is it
You have to feel it.
but
is it a word that captures the essence of cruelty? Like
it
that-
does. And actually, I love that part because it made me think of how I felt at times. And sometimes, like, I have these spells of self-pity or whatever, like, oh, like, you know. And I was thinking, like, okay, this is it. And he's exactly describing that. So I really connected to what he was talking about.
Does the word exist in Slovakian also?
Yeah, lutost.
Lutost.
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah. So,
But
and
it's not
I
just sorriness,
appreciate
pretty
his,
much we can translate.
we talked about it, I really appreciated his use of, his style is very plain.
It is, yeah.
And he speaks about very lofty, sort of psychological, existential things in a very, very plain language.
I think that's very important to point out because I think he's absolutely committed to a very prosaic prose style because in his own life he's been burned by poetry. Poetry made him lose his sense of balance and buy into this political ideology. Poetry allows people to get carried away and cheer when their fellow citizens are taken to the gallows without due process and things like that. So I think he started as a poet. There's been this remarkable kind of rediscovery of some of his books where, as a young poet, he was writing, odes to Stalin, and he tried to kind of distance himself from earlier variations of himself. But I think he realized that he went badly astray as a poet and informed by poetry. And maybe he thinks that by this.
I thought it was the ugly woman at the beginning, right? The woman he couldn't explain why he had been a lover of hers. She was the ugly woman. She's the poet / communism. He doesn't quite disavow, but he can't explain why he was.
Yeah. Again, I guess.
You know what the tooth, the whole tooth?
No.
No, the one before that. Before
The
that.
one before, yeah.
She got the big nose. And
Yeah, the
Oh,
nose.
yeah, the very beginning, okay, yeah. Love letters.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for him to completely.
Tom and I had different love letters, right?
Right.
And that's part of the variation kind
Yeah.
of like thing.
You think you're going back to the same story when
That's
you read
what
part
I thought
4,
initially, yeah.
Love Letters. He's always keeping you on your toes about that. But I think one of the reasons why he doesn't completely disavow it is that I think he can see a parallel universe in which he remained a communist. And we now, there was a big kerfuffle, you may remember, about 10 or 15 years ago when he says in this novel, our only immortality is going to be in the police files. And then they found this document in the police files which suggested, although it was deeply contested, that as a young man he'd taken part in the denunciation of somebody who had sneaked back into the country. That person ended up being arrested and serving a prison term of hard labor. That was disputed when it all emerged in 2008, but I don't think he can believe in his own innocence. That's for sure.
Right, but he doesn't want to believe in anything. I think that's why I was talking about the modernist.
Yeah.
If you like Sternberg, it's not because you love harmony, right? You don't love what other people love about music. You're looking for something really different in that kind of moment.
Yeah.
And it's not, people don't leave Sternberg smiling, right? It's just this deeply contemplative, you turn back into yourself, and there's this kind of, space that's created for you to somehow revolve back onto that infinity in the interior space, which is again very Rilke. And so, I know he's a poet too, but Rilke's metaphors are all about this kind of inward turning that happens in the face of the other person's death.
I think he does believe in something, Dan. And maybe you're all going to think this is not a sufficient answer, but I think he does believe in something. I think he believes in the novel as an art form and a space in which all these tensions within himself and within the culture can be held in place. Maybe that's not enough to live by, but to sit down and write a novel is itself a kind of article of faith, because it is to sit down and to create and to construct and not deconstruct.
I
And
mean,
not tear
I'd be
things-
willing to go somewhere that way, but you have to remember the novelists that he talks about are the ones that have graphomania, and that are the ones that are presaging all of the horrible, everybody just talking about themselves, right? And so, why do you write, you know?
I have a question. In this Czech book, there's a commentary at the end, an essay, and they're talking about that this is really an anti-novel, this Book of Laughter Forgetting,
Mhm.
that the structure of this is very different, and and I thought you talked about it a little bit at our last meeting, and that he wanted to name the book the novel of Roman, the novel of laughter and forgetting, but the French
Gallimard,
he encouraged him to call it a book of
How
laughter and
interesting.
because he didn't, because he thought that this book could become sort of argument over the genre of novel. So
That's really
that it's
interesting,
different. Do you see that? Like,
I do, but I think anti-novels are some of the greatest novels. I mean, a few years after publishing this, he'll publish a book called The Art of the Novel. I mean, because the novel by its nature is meant to entertain the new, and it's such a capacious and experimental form, you know, some of the best novels you're going to read are going to be experiments which are so different to the more conventional novels you're going to read. I mean, in a way, the novel and literary fiction itself kind of continues to renew itself and be relevant by doing something quite different to Jane Austen. Jane Austen is great, and I teach Jane Austen. I wouldn't want us to be still writing novels exactly like that 200 years later. I mean, you know, we could also say, I think about the ways in which, you know, if you are a big fan of the great American tradition of the Broadway musical, you know, seeing Rent in the 90s or Hamilton about 10 years ago might have been a great shock to the system. And those are, in some ways, kind of anti-Broadway musicals. But they're also a way that the form is reinventing itself and renovating itself and revitalizing itself. Yes?
I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
I've read a lot of Václav Havel's work,
Mhm.
you know, and I kind of understand him better satiring the system,
Yeah.
you know, than I do him. That's just a comment I want to make. I don't understand everything he's saying as much as I do Václav Havel's writings.
Of course, the big difference is they, Havel,
was completely normal politician and not also, so he's completely different, Havel, right?
Yeah, he's like-
but he stayed. Kundera left and Havel stayed
Stayed,
to face the music
Yeah, just like that.
and to fight back, absolutely. I mean, to his credit, Kundera has said that I've been misinterpreted in the West as a dissident writer. I'm not a dissident writer. Somebody
Yeah,
like Havel is a true dissident. He stuck around and
Well, I don't
He-
want to stir your
No, not at all.
comments away,
No, it's
but that's what
completely-
I just, my personal,
Yeah.
I understand Václav Havel's work a lot more than I do his,
Mm.
you know, and what he's trying to say. But I'm learning from you the insights there, so.
well, I probably, I wonder if this gentleman is actually mentioned in the index here.
Yeah, before we finish
Yeah.
that, because you asked the question to begin with about whether this is still relevant. And if it's relevant, I think it's only because it's weird and hard to read, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is nothing to this book
Yeah.
if you get rid of the weird and hard to read part. And I found it hard to read too. It's not like, I'm not
Well,
just.
that's why I'm here, if you can figure out what he's trying to say, you know.
Right. So I think,
then, you know,
I mean, I
find out.
obviously I think I'm right about everything, but I think that I'm right. It's this incredibly dense set of references to Nietzsche and to how Nietzsche was read, where he's somehow trying to put a woman in the place where the man had been. And it's a very difficult kind of transposition, but it's this, the reason to do it is because where Thomas Mann's high modernism, and if you know Thomas Mann, I mean, it's very depressing, all about death and all about this kind of like getting to be in that space. Somehow Kundera thinks that that's too easy. He wants to be a little harder than all those people that are just talking about death. And it's more like, okay, well, no, you got crows, right? You got these blackbirds, you got these things going on, you got this, you can't just retreat. You're in this space. I mean, I think it's a very anti-kitsch moment, right? There's no soft kind of like retreat into those things that we all want where, yeah, I understand the past and that makes sense. And, oh, gee, that's nice. None of that. It's all,
Yeah,
you know.
to the point that I was looking for this gentleman's name in the index, and here he is several times. Somebody, eminent Czech dissident, translator, mentor to Václav Havel, Zdeněk Urbanek, who came to Dublin in 1990, right after the Velvet Revolution, and we were kind of delighted that this authentic Czech dissident was visiting with us, and he was like regarded as an honorary Irish citizen because he translated a lot of Irish literature into Czech, and he was a kind of quietly heroic figure. It turned out he'd sheltered Jewish refugees during World War II. He'd been consistently anti-communist. He was one of the members of Charter 77, one of the signatories. And in my naivety at 22, when I got talking to him during the coffee break, I thought he would be happy to hear about Milan Kundera. And I asked him, well, what do you think of your compatriot, Milan Kundera? And he said, he paused, and I realized, oh boy, trouble. Faux pas. He said, I think the problem with Kundera is that he intellectualizes everything. And that is all I will say about Kundera. Mic drop moment happened in the 1990s. So certainly that's something that a lot of other Czech writers and intellectuals have had a
It
problem.
reminds me of one of the orgy scenes, though, right? So, like, Barbara is trying to say that you shouldn't intellectualize
Yeah.
everything.
And they're laughing.
I haven't read a lot of other Czech writers, you know, except, well, Charter 77, that was my master's project, so I was into that heavily. But Václav Havel, I can understand what he was saying, no age, you know, but, and I need to get into more of the dissident, their writings.
Yeah.
I haven't read a lot of them, I'm not familiar with everything.
Kundera's own tastes in Czech literature were very, very broad. You know, there's writers that he celebrates who are so different to him. You know, he loved "I Served the King of England," which is something a lot of Czechs themselves recommend. And I think the difference between it and Kundera's novels is that it's really funny. You know, it's not just talking about laughter, but it makes you laugh. And it's a much more organic kind of story than this is. I mean, I love this variations on the theme, but I wouldn't want to be reading this kind of novel all the time.
I just wanted to ask about laughter.
What's that?
You
Yeah.
move on.
Laughter?
Laughter, you
And
mentioned
some
it,
parts
and it's
make
not
you
about
laugh.
forgetting laughter.
Yeah.
You didn't talk about laughter. And why this angelic laughter is so horrifying to him? Why, everything like that laughter comes from devil.
Yeah.
That's the Rilke quote, right? So that's going back to Rilke's, and the idea there, I think, is that when you hear something transcendent, and laughter is transcending, there's something horrifying about it because it's also connected to losing contact, right? And so the idea that he intellectualizes everything, and then you're giving up yourself and you're afraid of your death. The laughter that transcends your fear somehow is also contact with the infinite, right? Because it gets you out of that space of being in your body. You're forgetting, you're laughing, but that's also horrifying because at that time, in the transcending, you're on the other side of the border, you're closer to death than to life, all these things happen.
I have to correct myself because the scene with the hat at the funeral I
That
think
was
is
funny.
genuinely funny. But that's the different kind of laughter. That's the kind of laughter that kind of
But it's a
humanizes
true,
things.
it's a true scene, of course. That happened.
I did not know
That actually happened. Yeah.
We?
Yeah. I mean, that is a historical fact.
So there was a real life equivalent of Passer with the.
Wait, hold on. The
Oh, this-
beginning of
yeah.
the book
No,
happened.
Yeah.
no, the scene towards the end where they're
towards
in
the-
the
The
grave.
little head drops.
Oh, the little.
Grave.
I don't know. That was funny.
Yeah.
I don't know about
But
that.
the
one in
photograph being erased.
I thought it was pretty endearing, but maybe it's too simplistic how he said that the balcony where Gottwald and
Oh, that had,
that Kafka went to grammar school in the
Yeah.
same building.
Yeah.
And he talked about how, the streets in Prague changed names so many times, how, everything is being forgotten. And so the book of laughter and forgetting, how, history gets erased. And
At
that,
least 10
like, there are
times my
streets,
street
he
changed.
talked about one street that changed names 3 times since, yeah. And so how, people in the history get erased and.
It's
Also city names change.
city names change. Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
That
And-
I'm so glad you mentioned Kafka because I think Kafka is kind of lurking behind much of this novel. And again, it's in some ways he's a very different writer to Kafka. But I think Kafka is Kafka is maybe his kind of north star when it comes to writing prose. And we were talking about this when we talked about this book over dinner one time back in the spring. Not only is that trip to the island, to the children's island, a very strange story. It goes on a long time. I mean, it's almost like a novella in itself. I think he's kind of riffing on long Kafka stories that he loves, like In the Penal Colony. It seems to be his little kind of homage to Kafka. And there's, you talk about it being an anti-novel. I suppose if it's an anti-novel, it's kind of breaking the rules of what normally happens in a more strictly realist novel. I mean, in Jane Austen, this is going to be fun in Jane Austen if people started kind of spinning into the air or something over the big house. If the Bennet sisters would join hands and go spinning up into the English sky. But, and I've said this at one of the other meetings, but I think it's particularly true here because there is such a debt to Kafka in part 6 of the novel. He said the great freedom of reading Kafka was to realize that after Kafka, the border of the improbable was no longer guarded. Anything could happen in a novel. And if suddenly, this dude in jeans driving a red car pops into Tamina's cafe and says, "Come on," we're on our way to the island. That's it. He needs no further justification. Or did you find that kind of annoying that?
Don't do it.
Yeah. Or did you find that to be a frustrating part of the reading experience, that there seemed to be no limits, no rules of what could happen?
It really stood out to me, that part of Camina's story,
Yeah.
where she, you know, she goes to the river, crosses it with the kid, and it's completely different from all the other stories. There's some strange
is.
things in the whole book, but this is like, it becomes like fantasy, different from the rest, and I didn't really know what to make of it.
Yeah, it's a very different texture, isn't
I
it?
sort of felt it's a dream.
Yeah.
But completely like dream, that is not real.
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, you kind of wonder, is she dead? Well, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah,
not. Maybe
exactly.
she's just going to wake up and thought, that was a really bad glass of Calvados that I drank last night. I remember back in the late 1980s when we were all sitting around in college talking about magical realism, I even knew kind of, I wasn't that smart myself, but I could pick out the really smart kids and thought that this person's going to be somebody. And there was one person in our class was clearly brilliant, and his roommate was a guy who's been nominated for an Oscar as a director. So they were kind of the smart kids on campus. We tended to gravitate around their apartment. And I remember this guy who's gone on to be a pretty successful playwright, kind of saying, I don't think you've really fully understood magical realism, or I would describe magical realism as being more like an ironic fairy tale. And I remembered my friend Michael's definition when I reread this, because at that point, when the guy shows up with the red sports car, Kundera says, and as in a tale, as in a dream, of course it's a tale, of course it's a dream. Tamina comes out from behind the bar where she has spent several years of her life and leaves the cafe with the young man. A red sports car is parked at the curb. So it's very self-consciously posing itself as a fairy tale, but at the same time, clearly not really believing in fairy tales.
I find you cannot read this book through. I find you have, I just can read only a little bit at a time,
Yeah.
because it just has so much in
I had
it.
to
And I
go
enjoy
back.
rereading it.
I had
And
to go back because I
yeah.
did not understand,
Right.
so I have to rewind. I listened to it.
And I really enjoyed going back to the joke and reading it out of order, because, it's all about different characters, and you can just jump around the book and pick up a chapter, and it doesn't matter what
Yeah.
order you read it in when you kind
It's a
of.
Schoenberg thing.
There's not that much difference to this and Laughable Loves, which is, that was my experience with Laughable Loves, and I pick up the volume and read one of the stories, and not necessarily in order, but that he presents as a book of short stories. But this is definitely a novel, and maybe it's just that thematic organization around the twin pillars of laughter and forgetting that makes it a novel. Maybe it's a novel because he claims it's a novel, even though Mr. Gallimard said it's a book. Something you said a moment ago, did you say you listened to it also?
Yeah, I have it on my Audible.
Yeah, I've listened to.
I can read. First of all, I don't have time. I move around and I listen.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
I didn't listen to all of this on audio, but that narrator that they get, I think his name is Hoxie, something is Jonathan Hoxie, or it's a name like that. I listened to several of the Kundera novels narrated by him. I listened just to the preview in rereading this, because there was something I was puzzled by when I read it again in the spring, and I thought, am I just being slow here? Because I thought, okay, this has just got to be a typo. And maybe you had the same experience. At the bottom of page 4, right at the beginning, there's this strange sentence. He ended up agreeing with his more prudent dom of speech. What? Is that meaning the word dom I've never heard? And I thought, there's got to be a line missing there. And I assumed that when I read it again in the spring. But this time around I was going, wait a second, what's going on here? I checked out the ebook, it's exactly the same. I checked out the little preview of the audiobook. You can get the first chapter for free. It's exactly the same. And he says that line with great conviction. He ended up agreeing with his more he ended up agreeing with his more prudent dom of speech. But the laws punished anything. It's like, what does that mean?
You are missing a line.
And so, I am missing a line. And so is the person reading the audiobook, because they kept that mistaken.
You most likely had the same prudent.
Yeah. Do you have the Czech? Do you have the Czech version? Let's check.
I know, I have that.
Let's check it out.
I checked the French version.
Did you check the French version?
I checked the French version, and the French version has the missing sentence. He ended up agreeing with his more.
Yeah, what number is it in? What section?
It's section 1, part 2, just at the end of.
What is it over me?
So here it is.
What's that?
French with you?
I don't have the French with me. I managed to find it last night. So I'm glad they finally corrected it, because apparently for at least 10 years it was missing in English.
Wait, so what's the correction?
The correct sentence is, or sentences, he ended up agreeing with his more prudent friends, period. The Constitution, it is true, guarantees freedom of speech.
Freedom. All right.
So there
And
goes
you're letting us look at this.
half an hour of my life thinking,
I love it, yeah.
what am I
know.
missing here?
It is really funny.
But
Yeah.
I, naively thought, wow, they wouldn't say, they wouldn't say it, they wouldn't perform this on the audio version.
And it did.
didn't
Convincing.
mean
And
something.
they did.
But that guy says it with great conviction.
I was listening to it this morning and I stopped there and thought, what?
So you heard it too. And I was thinking, up until last night when I found it online in the French version, I thought, tomorrow night somebody's going to explain to me what a dom of speech is. And I'm going to go, but of course.
That's the title for your next album.
I have something, and I need to go
Yeah.
back to my recording. The stunning thing for me is that Kundera in this and other books is so convincing when talking from the perspective of a woman. If I was ever trying to write something, I would never dare. And this is for the females in the audience here, like how convincing really is. Like how the behavior of these women. Because I just can't tell.
He dared, but did he succeed?
Yes, did he succeed?
There are people here, y'all grew up in educated in those systems, weren't you?
Yes.
And do you find, I think y'all understand this better than some of
That's-
us in America.
no, it's-
Because y'all were educated
right.
through that system.
No, it's in many respects, it's very dated in the fact that, there are parts that just completely nail the era. And, he actually wrote a horoscope. Kundera did. So that is true. That is a true part of it. So he was, forbidden to work basically, and somebody didn't give him that little job.
Pretty much like
But
all these.
I think
So-
almost, I don't know.
So he was so he actually did that. And there are many scenes. I cracked up about the scene with the poets in that salon. That was priceless
It's
to
great at
me.
making fun of men.
Yeah,
He sees what's
well-
wrong with men, but I'm not sure that he sees what's.
Well, he
Does-
is just
the
making
perspective
fun of
women.
human nature.
Yeah, but does he do-
Everyone has certain predispositions, and he's just making fun of it because it is funny in a way. Everybody's something. And maybe if you think that your your way of your character or is the right, that's what he kind of said. It's all laughable, right? I mean,
Well,
everybody's
laughable loves laughable is one of his favorite words.
So I think it was nice how he kind of pointed out, well, he made this big distinction about the poets and that Boccaccio, who was not a poet, and how they approach women, right? The poets like look at women a certain way, and the people that are not poets look at women differently. But I do think, back to Marianne's comment, I mean, I read Tom Wolfe's book, and he wrote his book, I'm Charlotte Simmons, and he is a 70-year-old man writing about college scene. And it's very much from a 20-year-old point of view that sort of, has a very bad sexual experience. It's like, and I'm reading it and thinking, okay, how does this guy? And he wrote about it very, apparently he had college-age grandkids, but he had to be very close to them to get out. So,
Do you think Tamina was a convincing psychological character? Like, did you psychologically go like?
I do think emigrating from a country I think it was. I do think, so I'm an immigrant, and she was convincing in many respects. I thought he did, interestingly, he said Tamina lives in a small Swiss town, which I will not name, but she comes from Prague. So, there's a woman from Prague, and she ends up being a waitress in some small provincial Swiss town. And so when people emigrate, they end up in ways of life that are not what they were in their country. And I think he portrayed that. And also, like, she's approached by people, or rather men, that she would probably never associate in her home country, and he portrayed that. And she cannot make a connection, And it's really interesting how the countries in Europe are culturally very different.
Yeah.
And so even when he talks about that gathering of the poets in the salon, he is looking at them from Paris with a complete nostalgia.
Yeah, he wants
because
it to
he
be
would love to be there.
1962
be part
in
of
Prague
that
again.
group,
Yeah.
So, I think there's so much written about Kundera. There are books on him. My dad gave me one book where 80 Czech writers and everybody who is something, including the Novak, who wrote a 900-page book, write essays. So there has been so much commented about him. He is a very complicated figure. And I thought he was very wise to take a position that at some point in his life he decided he's not going to give any interviews and talk to any press. And he said, I want my work to speak for me. And that's what I think it was a pretty wise decision on his part.
And he became a French writer, essentially. I mean, that is.
He started writing in French in 90s.
Yeah. And it really, I mean, you get a sense that in his later decades, he no longer was, literally true because they moved from Rennes to Paris, but he was no longer living in a building up on the top floor of the high rise with the window that had to face east, and you imagine him at his desk, tears in his eyes, thinking about, his lost world of Prague. And remember, he said, I thought this was very interesting, and maybe some of you have kind of personal experiences of this or adjacent experiences, that he's talked to other emigres who, dedicate themselves to the cause of, liberating Czechoslovakia from Russian domination. And they consecrate their lives to that, but at a certain point they say, no, I just can't do it anymore. It's an illusion. That they become alienated even from that. And I think maybe that kind of anticipates him just eventually giving up on the Czech language.
I regret Dr. Edward Jaworski helped me with my project a long time ago. He's deceased now, but he was Edward Benious's secretary.
Wow.
And he was a very more conservative, because when we were discussing Charter 77, he kind of, I shouldn't say this about him because I'm trying to take care of him a little bit, but he was kind of thought they were hooligans, you know, or something, you know, but
Troublemakers?
troublemakers.
Maybe? Yeah.
Because he was conservative. And, but anyway, that they're the ones who did it for him, you know. He worked all his life since he had to leave Czechoslovakia, you know, because he was Benious's private secretary.
Did he emigrate to the United States?
Yeah, he was professor emeritus at University of Texas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, he, and very silent, and I regret that I didn't go back and see him more, because we could have discussed more.
Yeah.
You know, what he.
Did he live long enough to see post-Soviet
Yes, he died in
Czechoslovakia?
1996,
Right.
and they did award him the Masaryk award. He should have gotten the Lion, you know, for what he, you know,
And
for who he
what's
was.
his name again?
Dr. Edward Jaworski. Now,
And
see,
he was
he.
the secretary of
He was
President Beneš.
Beneš, yes. You can see, he was his private secretary. He wasn't a trained attorney, but he taught government at UT. And he probably was a good friend of Dr. Joseph Corbel, who was Madeleine Albright's daddy and Condoleezza Rice's mentor, you know, at Denver. I'm sure, I don't go into that, how far they were close, you know, but I'm sure they were colleagues and they discussed things. See, that's what I regret, that I didn't go back to Austin and talk to him more, you know, but I was silent at the time, you know, I was silent what I was doing, so.
Do they have his papers there? Do the ransoms?
His papers, I think, went to the Hoover Institute.
Okay.
And they have all of it. Now, I have just broken the ice with Dr. Reich, you know. She's head of the Hoover Institute, and, you know, I don't expect something from her because I respect her, you know. And so I don't know, I even suggested to her, how can we, see, because this Charter 77 project right now is in working with people, that my old colleagues that I work with at West Point, because there's so much history in it.
Have you talked to one of the archivists there? Because sometimes archivists are just delighted to hear from somebody who wants to activate one of the archives.
Where, at Hoover?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I should, because Dr. Jaworski may have been editing, he had 2 copies of the project, so,
Yeah.
you know, the problem was I was so secretive in what I was doing, you know? Because well, see, let me explain it. I know I don't want to mess up your program here.
Not at all.
But,
You are the program.
Yeah,
All are the program.
no. See, I was, by the grace of God, the Holy Spirit, if y'all don't have to understand that. But when I was a lieutenant in Germany, that was in 77 when Charter 77 started.
Yeah.
But when I was a lieutenant in Nuremberg, I didn't know all that was going on over there because I was just a minor, you know, petty lieutenant. But now, since and no one can say that I had inside information. I didn't start researching Charter 77 until I came back and was in graduate school at St. Mary's. And then all this became revealed. See, General Patton was in my chain of command, George Patton. And, you know, his father wanted to liberate Prague in
Keep rolling,
World
yeah,
War II.
yeah.
And so this was, to him, this was closure to his work. Because the Army would always, whenever there was some unrest in that country or over there, they'd move little Patton over into Germany. See, he had different assignments over
Yeah.
there. And that's how, you know, it was who he represented. He represented his daddy. He was a Patton. And so he happened to be I'm sure he had copies of my project. And there's rumors, I haven't seen it, that he signed twice, you know, on this, signed off twice. He said, here's mine and then one for Papa too, you know, for Charter 77. Because Charter 77, you know, they were the ones that pushed it through, you know,
Yeah.
for so many years. But anyway, I don't want to mess up your,
Well, I think
y'all have taught me a lot about this that that I didn't understand, all of you.
So-
But I would love to talk to y'all more about Charter 70s,
Okay.
but that's okay, this is, that's.
You need that book that I gave them.
Yeah, but anyway.
We'll have to meet again.
The point I'm trying to make is the history, with Dr. Edward Taborski involved in the project. It was kind of like, I call it like the Manhattan Project, but we're not building a bomb this time, you know.
Yeah.
We're building, because Charter 77 is the model of how things should be done in the world. It should be presented to the world as a model of how things should be done. And then that entire time there, that 12 years until the fall, all that was, it was done peacefully and professionally. That should be, well, I mean, I don't know what's going on with my colleagues. They don't tell me their part. But, you know, it should be written all together as a model of how things should be done, you know.
Yeah, it's at this time, because with all of our political polarities, something as reasonable as that seems very countercultural. So it's time to bring it back. Yeah.
See, there was history, not only, we don't want to take away the spotlight of Václav Havel and the Charter 77 signatories and those dissidents. We're not trying to take away their, their spotlight. But we had history on our side too. You know, with General Patton involved and Edward Taborski and, you know, other people too.
We have the Blackbirds too.
What?
And we have Blackbirds too.
Whatever.
That guy.
Now y'all see why I'm silent. I'm finally talking about it. I mean, during the time, I was very silent. My professors at St. Mary's didn't know the other connection of my, in the military.
I hope you talk to the curators at the Hoover Institute, because just working with like, I was just in special collections earlier this week with my own students, and those people are so passionate about what they do, and sometimes they just can't understand why entire tranches of papers are untouched and they're waiting for somebody.
Yeah, I just heard rumor, I had to check it out. I mean, somewhere down the line, I heard that Edward Taborski sent his papers to the Hoover Institute. Maybe it's because Dr.
Nice reason to go to Northern California too.
Well, Dr. Rice did her PhD in Czechoslovakia too.
Did she
And so
really?
did Madeline Albright. Yeah, but I only did my Master of Arts. It should have been continued on, but lazy old thing.
But she's got Texas connections too. She'll listen to her voice.
Well, anyway, but Dr. Rice, I mean, she's very well versed in Czechoslovakia.
So what you'll have to do is you'll have to go and find out this information and report back to us.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Bring Dr. Rice to Houston so that we can hear all about it.
Well, I'll let it report back.
Yeah, I'm interested. I don't know the rest of you, but I don't want to cut this off.
Yeah, I think we probably finished what we need to say.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you.
It was great. Tonight felt really like a book club.
Right.
So,
It was a nice
more of
little
a conversation.
symptom on it.
yeah, and we had a semicircle, but no magic circle. So there was room for different voices.
The orgies later.
I understand a little more about
I want to
what
thank the
you're
two of
talking
you again for taking us on this journey that has probably gone longer than either of you ever truly anticipated.
Great experience.
Hush now. But no, I mean, I found this to be enlightening and engaging, and I think, here we are months later with still an audience that is curious and wanting to take part in this. So thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah, right?
Edward Taborski, and I'd go to his office in Austin, sit with him. He had this bust of President Edward Benius in his office. I don't know where that bust is now, but that reminded him every day, that was his boss and his mentor, and everything.
That's somewhere in the Hoover Institute archives, because as our director of special collections told us the other day, archives, the university archives, they're kind of halfway between being a library and a museum.
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't know what to do with, say, a statue,
It goes
Okay,
with the archives.
put it with the archives, yeah.
I also want to thank Alice Randall for busting and helping push this all along. And then a little housekeeping. You guys had a few things that are on your chairs, a few items. Of course, the DeCamera concert that is happening next week. There is also Slavic Heritage Festival, which is this Sunday. If you're interested, it's the Czechs and the Slovaks and the Ukrainians and the Polish, and it's food and dancing and lots of fun, so come hang out with that one. And then next month, October, is Czech Heritage Month in the state of Texas. We don't make these things up. But we have our annual Czech Heritage Month concert that's going to be on the 17th of October. It's Thursday, and that's the Apollo Chamber Players. This year is also a year of Czech music, and that's by the Czech government. And so we are focusing on Smetana because of this 200th anniversary of him.
Cool.
So, and that's free, so bring all of your friends. And then come back at some other point in time and check out our exhibits because we had some great interns this summer and we sort of changed things around a little bit. So, anyways,
Are we gonna continue with a book club? Are you?
Come again?
Are you gonna continue
We
having a
do
book club?
aim to do something next year.
Okay.
We do.
We need
We'll-
to
we gotta
find, we need
good
to find
partners.
more erudite men
Yeah.
or women to lead us.
You can't.
But
Need these guys.
we-
I know,
yeah.
it's hard, right?
Yeah.
We need the cantankerous and the curmudgeon and
Right.
a little bit of that whimsy
So
that
we
comes in there.
like-
So I'm talking all about you.
And somebody was traumatized here by the ripping of the book.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I heard that. Okay.
I was very glad that you brought that to the
Yeah.
report.
My favorite book, actually.
Oh, okay.
You'll always remember it.
Oh, we will never forget that.
Okay.
I think it was a great theatrical moment. Anyways.
to end, right there.
Thank you.
One question.
Snacks, please. Yes.
The DeCamera concert, what space is it in? What venue is it?
It is
It's in the Zelda Hall.
Hobby Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I'm sure it's on their website, but then this flyer that.
Yeah, it's at the Hobby Center.
I think there's wine and cheese too.
There is wine and cheese,
There
please do
is
enjoy.
wine and cheese. And Kundera.
We have them, we have their young performers. Yes. But we haven't. We haven't.
Okay, guys, thank you.
Hey, Father, nice to see you.
Always. I love it. Yeah, because, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting.
Where's your parish again? How far do you go?
They leave something else, that's the stuff.
I used to teach out the Winter Strike Jesuit, not too far from
And
Dan was so
farther west.
I heard that you were,
Yes.
so I did some research, but it's some
Yeah, it's very exhibit. Keeps on swerving.
funny part. Like, I didn't know this were
Yeah.
And